Welcome to the realm of the unexplained, brought to you by Paranormal M. Subscribe and turn on notifications to unlock a gateway to the supernatural. We hope you're prepared for a mind-expanding experience. Tucked in and expletive slapped. The house I would consider to be my childhood home is the one where I lived in from age 3 to 20, literally most of my life. There are many stories I can tell from living in that house, but today I'll focus on two. One happened when I was about 7, and the other happened when I was around 13. When I was 7, I shared a room with my younger sister. We had a bunk bed, and I was on the top bunk. We slept with our door open because both of us were scared of the dark, and the lamp on the hall was always on. Now, I've always been a pretty light sleeper. If someone were walking down the hall, I'd wake up. This particular night, I was sleeping with my back to the room. I remember being scared awake because I felt someone rub my back and pull the blanket up over my shoulders. I thought it was odd because I hadn't woken up to my parents walking down the hall to my room. I brushed it off, kept my back to the room, and went back to sleep. The next morning, I asked my younger sister if Mom or Dad came into the room last night. She said she didn't hear anyone. So, being the curious child I am, I asked both my parents if they came into my room at any point last night. They told me they hadn't because they were feeling under the weather and went to bed not long after my sister and I laid down. I remember hearing them talking and their door opening and closing right after we laid down. So after my investigation, I've decided that there was a ghost in the house that was watching after my sister and I. I may have woken up afraid because I was caught off guard, but I felt an overwhelming sense of peace immediately after the fear subsided. Maybe that's why I didn't bother turning around that night. Now, my experience at 13 is very different. I had graduated to having my own room and was no longer in a bunk. I slept with my door closed and a bit heavier now, too. Still pretty light, but I didn't wake up every time somebody opened a door in the house. It was around 2 a.m. and I woke up because I had to pee very bad. I get up and walk to the door, but hesitate when opening it. There was a sense of dread at what might be on the other side. Eventually, my bladder won that fight, as it normally does, and I open the door slowly. I peek out and don't see anything, so I run to the bathroom. After I was finished, the same dreaded feeling happened when I went to open the bathroom door. Again, I peeked out to see nothing and made my run for my room. I made it to my room and immediately jump up under the blankets. The ghosts can't see you if you're under the covers. Everybody knows this. I settle down after being panicked for a bit and roll on over to my stomach and with my head facing the wall. I'm on the verge of sleeping when I felt something smack the absolute crap out of my lower back. Of course, my immediate reaction was to jump up, turn around, and yell at my sister. She had gotten into the habit of pranking me by now. I turn and don't see anyone there. So I get out of bed, check around to make sure she wasn't hiding anywhere. Once I check the room and see she's not anywhere in it, I get very scared. I run to the door and fling it open. The dread of staying in my room was way more than the door from earlier. I go into my sister's room, and sure enough, she's passed out in her bed. I decide that I'm sleeping in her room because I was just slapped in mine. Once I told her what happened, she rolls her eyes but lets me in bed with her. She doesn't believe anything that doesn't happen to her. I didn't experience anything else that night, but it was scary enough to remember it even years later. Not sure if the same ghost is involved in both stories. I never experienced the tucking in again, but had plenty of times being scared. I wonder if we did something to piss off the ghost, and it went from being kind to being threatening. I say we because my sister and I have shared stories. Maybe there were two different ghosts, and the scary one became the dominant one. Can't really say. creepy neighborhood haunt. I was around 12 years old and sitting on the back of my dad's truck with the tailgate down. I was waiting on my friend to meet up with me so we could go do whatever 12-year-olds do on a weekend. It was a spring day in Georgia, so everything was alive and very noisy. Dogs were barking, birds were chirping, and bugs were screaming. After sitting there a while, everything goes silent. There wasn't a peep. I look around to see if there were any birds or dogs around me. Well, there wasn't. When I turned back to see the street, there was a black, misty, shapeless form walking from my neighbors. Across the street from me. Across from their yard to their neighbor's yard. As I'm watching it move, I whispered in disbelief, "What the hell is that?" Apparently it heard me because it stopped as soon as I said it, and looked like it was turning towards me. Although it was shapeless, it was thinner while moving and kind of thickened out like a normal person would when you look at them head on. It stood there for what felt like an eternity, and I'm guessing stared me down. My heart was beating very fast, and I don't think that I was even breathing. It started to move towards me, and I was about to step into the street when I heard my friend yell to me from up the street. The way the houses were built is she couldn't see the side of the street with the form. I snap my head to her, raise my hand so she knows I'm there, and immediately go back to look for the form. It wasn't there anymore. Once I saw that it was gone, everything came back to life. All the noise expected at springtime hit me at once, and I became extremely overwhelmed and started to cry. My friend reached me and saw that I was crying. She was rightfully confused and asked why I was upset. I told her everything that I experienced and she got quiet. She told me she saw it not too long before I did at her house. She lived a street over, and told me that she was terrified during the encounter. She said it started to move towards her from her neighbor's yard, like what I saw, into hers, and she was completely frozen. She broke out of that trance because her mom told her she needed to come inside for dinner. Because we were so spooked by that, we decided it was a good day to have a movie marathon. I never saw it again, but I do believe I had other encounters with it. Maybe I'll try to reconnect with some of my childhood friends and see if they remember that neighborhood like I do. Should I be concerned? My boyfriend and I moved into our current house in June. It's been wonderful to own our own home. However, the woods behind our house and the bog, as my friends refer to it, leave everyone on edge. Of course, this wasn't noticed until after we moved in. There's been a few weird happenings behind the house, but now things have gotten a lot closer. My friend and I were outside chatting at about 10 p.m. I was taking the trash out and asked her to come with me for safety in numbers. As we're talking, we both hear a child either laugh or cry. Hard to tell because we were pretty loud. We stop and listen. It sounds like a toddler girl around 3 or 4. She starts calling Mama over and over. Sometimes she sounds close and other times she's farther. My friend and I looked at each other and decided to go inside. My friend starts to interrogate me. How many kids live on this street? One who's about 12, I guess. Any Halloween decorations that speak? None. All are yard decorations that don't make sounds. Did you get goosebumps too? Yes. I hated being out there. Other than the toddler, it was very quiet and cold. Fast forward 2 nights later and my friend is back at my house. We're sitting on my couch planning a party, and we both hear giggling coming from the yard. It was loud enough to cut through our conversation and scare the shit out of my cat. We sit there quietly looking at the door and hear Mama again. Pull out my phone and look through my door camera. There's not a single person anywhere around, and there's faint giggling through the camera. Some short stories. Growing up in my childhood home, my friends and I spent a lot of time in the ditch between my neighbor's house and mine. We would do a whole bunch of things like crawling through the drainage pipes, only when sunny, of course, playing in the ditch while it rained. It was super fun when the water built up, and other forms of tomfoolery. One day I was hanging out in the ditch with a couple of my friends when we heard whistling. We all got quiet for a moment, listened very hard. It was getting closer and closer while we all looked around, panicked, trying to figure out if it was something messing with us. We all basically got out of that ditch. We looked around everywhere and didn't see anyone. Soon it sounded like the whistling was coming from behind us. We booked it to my house. We all took a few minutes to settle down, and we were still looking around to see if it was someone's older sibling being a jerk. Never did see anyone. We all discussed how scared we were and how it felt like the hairs on the back of our necks stood up the closer that the whistling was getting to us. We never saw anything, and we never heard the approach of anyone that might have been whistling. Once my mom and I were taking a walk around our neighborhood to get out of the house for a little bit. We were a couple of streets away from our street and walking next to the local park. It was midsummer in the middle of Georgia, so temperature was about 95 degrees. I don't know why I agreed to walk. I hate sweating. But we were just chatting about different things when both of us got silent as we walked through an ice-cold spot. It was 2 seconds at the most, but the change in temperature was very jarring. We get through the spot and walk in silence a bit further down the road. I break the silence first and ask if she felt the icy spot back there. She looked at me and nodded her head and said that she also felt like we were being watched and weren't supposed to go through that spot. The mood had drastically changed. We decided to end the walk early and go home. Lastly, a bunch of friends and I were at a neighborhood park and being your typical obnoxious middle schoolers. We were sitting around the picnic area table and we were laughing and joking. My younger sister was there, and I happened to be best friends with someone with the same name. We're all laughing and joking together when suddenly a few of us heard something calling my sister or friend's name. We aren't really sure who it's directed to. Those of us who heard it the first time quickly told the others to be quiet and to listen. We heard it again, and more clearly, because everyone was quiet now. It was very unsettling the way that the name was said. None of us could tell the gender of the voice or pinpoint exactly where it was coming from. It kept saying the name over and over, getting more drawn out each time it was said. There were a few other kids and parents at the park in the play area, so we figured it was one of them calling their kid. However, we were all watching them, and they were on the other side of the park, which means that they wouldn't have had to been yelling for us to hear them. They would have had to been yelling really loud. This voice that said the name was not yelling. After that, we decided to go our separate ways for that night. We didn't go back to the park for a while. Those are just some of the stories that came to my mind when I think back on living there. They weren't long enough to warrant their own posts, so I combined them. Dark figure in the middle of the day. My childhood home and neighborhood was pretty haunted. I've posted a few other stories about my house, but this happened in my neighborhood. I was around 12 years old and sitting on the back of my dad's truck, tailgate down. I was waiting for my friend to meet up with me so we could do whatever 12-year-olds do on a weekend. It was a spring day in Georgia, so everything was alive and very noisy. Dogs were barking, birds were chirping, bugs were screaming. After sitting there for a while, everything goes silent. There wasn't a peep. We just read this story, but my editor told me to, so on we go. Bear with me, guys. I looked around to see if there were any dogs or birds around me, and there wasn't. When I turned back to look at the street, there was a black, misty, shapeless form walking from my neighbors across the street from me. As I'm watching it move, I whispered in disbelief, "What the hell is that?" Apparently, it heard me because it stopped as soon as I said it and looked like it was turning towards me. Although it was shapeless, it was thinner while moving and kind of thickened out like a normal person would when you look at them head on. It stood there for what felt like an eternity, and I'm guessing stared me down. My heart was beating very fast, and I didn't think that I was breathing. It started to move towards me, and I was about to step into the street when I heard my friend yell to me from up the street. The way the houses were built is she couldn't see the side of the street with the form. I snap my head to her, raise my hand so she knows I'm there, and immediately go back to look for the form. It wasn't there anymore. Once I saw that it was gone, everything came back to life. All the noise expected at springtime hit me at once, and I became extremely overwhelmed. I even started to cry. My friend reached me and saw that I was crying. She was rightfully confused and asked why I was upset. I told her everything that I experienced. She got quiet. She told me she saw it not too long before I did at her house, and she lived a street over. I told her that she was terrified during the encounter. She said it started to move towards her from the neighbor's yard, like mine, and into hers. She was completely frozen. She broke out of that trance because her mom told her she needed to come inside for dinner. Because we were so spooked by that, we decided it was a good day to have a movie marathon. Never saw it again, but I do believe I had other encounters with it. Sorry for the repeat story, guys, but in order to keep things chronological on these, I'm gonna push forward. Shadow person, skinwalker, and I'm warning you guys, it says not safe for work. Anything could happen. Watch out. So to start this off, I was around maybe 12 or so at the time, and I had trouble sleeping. I remember waking up at a pretty early hour, like 4 a.m. I ended up going to use the bathroom. After this, I come back into my room. My window facing my bed had the curtains open so I could see through it, but not when it's pitch black out. What originally drew my attention to the window was I saw lightning outside. It wasn't rainy, so it was more just sky lightning. Sumi, never seeing that before, went to the window to take a better look. As I looked out my window, I immediately looked toward the yard. In my yard, standing there, was a tall creature. It looked like it could be Bigfoot, but its body was pitch black. What was scary was it was looking directly at me. It had these haunting, yellow, glowing eyes. I stared at it for a good 5 seconds before panic and fear set in. I ran into my mother's house and room, sobbing, scared out of my mind. I woke her up by saying, "Mom, there's something in the yard." She obviously didn't know what I meant, but she did see that I was terrified. I ended up going back into my room to look out again, and ended up seeing an empty yard instead. But I did sleep in my mom's room the rest of the night, but couldn't stop shaking. Even as a kid, I was never one to see imaginary things or be able to even visualize. And I know that what I saw was actually there. I went out the next morning and I swear I saw prints in the ground where that thing was. I think the creepiest part, however, was a few days later. I had planned a sleepover with my best friend, and he had canceled on me because he was nervous since he had never slept over. The next day, he actually told me about a vivid dream that he had. He had told me that he was in my room, looked out my window, and described the exact same thing I saw. But I'd never told him, because I kind of thought I was crazy. To this day, we still speak about it, and neither of us have any explanation to this. I wonder if I saw a shadow person, or maybe a skinwalker. It definitely was not human. I've since then had no other experiences seeing things like that. Coins dropping in the house. So this morning, me and my friend were sitting in the living room eating our cereal. Out of nowhere, we hear a sound of something dropping on the floor. My son stood up and scanned the floor. A coin was on the floor by the armrest of the couch. He picked up the coin and held it up. He dropped it to see if the noise was similar. It sounded exactly the same. I brushed it off, thinking that it must have just been on the arm of the couch and slid off. Fast forward a couple of hours. We decided to go to the local park, spend an hour or so there and come back. We sat down in the living room again, and within 2 minutes of sitting down, we hear the same noise again. This time coming from the hallway next to the living room. My girlfriend and I looked at each other suspiciously. She walked to the hallway to investigate. There was a coin on the floor of the hallway right in the middle. There were no shelves or cabinets near it. The sound both times sounded like it was dropped from straight up. There was no sound of rolling. After the first coin, my son put it into his dinosaur money box, so it wasn't the same coin. Both coins were 10 pence. We also don't have lots of random coins lying around. They're quite rare in the house. Was just wondering if this is a known paranormal thing, or if it means anything. Something outside our house. So my husband, baby, and I moved into my grandfather-in-law's house, and he moved to Tennessee. We don't like being outside after dark because it feels like something's watching us. Last night, my husband went out to the pole barn to look for some tools to mount our TV to, and he felt like something was following him, so he ran into the pole barn and shut the door. While he was running his USB-charged flashlight, which he just fully charged, shut off. He said he could hear footsteps and whispering looping around the pole barn. My gut was telling me something was wrong, and I knew he had his Apple Watch on, so I called him. He said as soon as his Apple Watch started ringing, whatever it was seemed to back off, and he decided to sprint for the back door. The ringing seemed to keep it from chasing him, and as soon as he came in and shut all the windows and blinds. We have security cameras on the outside of the house, but we have to go out to grab them and check the footage. We're not doing that until morning. We only have one facing the pole barn on the side of the house. I hope we can see whatever it was. We live in rural southern Michigan, if that's anything. We're unsure of what it is and trying to research what it could be. My husband is part Native American Cherokee, and he's afraid it's a skinwalker, but he's not sure. Anyone here have an idea of what it is? And how do we make ourselves safe? And no, we can't move. We don't have enough funds to, and I'm disabled. Dark spirit / evil house. Help needed. So last year, my landlord turned my house into an Airbnb. Gave me weeks to move. So I moved into an apartment on November 22nd, and it seemed great at first. Georgian house, open fireplace, large apartment. I didn't even see it at first as it was painted over, but the chimney's breast had "help" written on the wall, and it was bleeding through. I found out later why it was there, which I'll get to. So the first 2 months were great. I was in a long-distance relationship that was going very well. Had great friends, loved the home. However, little by little, I started to feel tired all the time, and in a low mood and kind of bleak about life. I decided to get a cat on December 22nd. Figured it was being without a cat, as I'd lost mine the year before due to old age. But the cat I got was terrified to go in my bedroom and spent most of the time growling and afraid of me. She died 2 months after getting her. Damn. She suddenly started open-mouth breathing like she was suffocating. Rushed her to the vets, and she had chronic heart failure and had to be put to sleep. My mood continued to spiral. I felt depressed in a way I've never felt before. I started to feel something touching my back. At first every few days, then daily. Mood gets worse and worse. Every night I felt like I had 1,000 people's grief washing over me. Sometimes it got so bad I'd have to go stand outside at 2 a.m. just to take a break, take a minute. Then my relationship broke down after 1.5 years. I lost friends I'd had for decades, just suddenly. I eventually got another cat on May 23rd. He too would not go near the bedroom. 2 months on, the cat was laid asleep in the same place that the last cat died, and suddenly hissed and ran across the room in a state of fear. He became completely disoriented and terrified and started breathing with his mouth open. Rushed him to the vets. They had to put him asleep. They had no idea what was wrong with him, but he was in a bad state of distress, and they said he was too ill to save as he was already old. My mood got so bad after that I started to feel suicidal for the first time in my life. I spent most days crying, and finally, after months of searching, found a new place, got the hell out of there. After moving out, I was so affected by the place that I contacted the old tenant, asked her if she'd experienced anything strange in there. She said straight away, yes. She said she moved in a pretty happy relationship. The first 2 months were great. After that, she started to feel really depressed and bleak, started fighting with her boyfriend. They became violent towards each other, which they had never had before. He ended up losing his mind and writing "help" on the wall. She saw a figure outside the bathroom, where the bedroom was, and heard a woman's voice saying a name one day. She said they had friends around and arguments would break out, totally out of character. She said she felt like something was feeding on her energy, sucking the life out of her. That's exactly how I felt. So I looked up the history. Turns out the head of the city's mental asylum in 1805 lived there. This was back when there was abuse and torture, and it was rife in the asylums. I'm now a month out of there in a different city, in a beautiful apartment, and I still don't feel right. I still feel a deep sadness in me, constant negative thoughts, depression in a way I've never felt. I feel numb and unable to move on from my experiences there. Although it was just feelings, I've never been so affected by a place. My ex is still calling me daily the last few months, but even he's now stopped calling a week ago. It's like I'm repelling everyone since living there. Can anyone give me an insight on what they think might have happened and what I should do now? Could it have been a dark entity, and it's still kind of attached to me? I've not felt anything touch my back since that day that I left the apartment. And it feels great, so I don't think it's followed me, whatever it was, but I can't seem to feel like the person I was before this. I just want to feel like me again, instead of numb. Ghosts are frickin' real. Can't believe what happened. Okay, so let me start by saying I've never really been sure in the afterlife that I'm one of those I have to see it to believe it kind of people. But my parents tell me that when I was really young, I used to see ghosts. They say that at one point I got so scared I asked all the ghosts to go away until I was 30. I don't really remember any of this, so I always assumed I just had a vivid imagination. Apparently it worked. They stopped showing up immediately. Well, I turned 30 last year, and about 6 months into the year, they came back. Well, one did. I couldn't sleep. I was just lying there awake, and I figured I'd get up and walk around the house a little bit. You know when you get that feeling that someone's standing right behind you? I had it so strongly, and I just assumed it must be my roommate behind me. I think I felt the floorboards move a little. That's how I knew someone was there. So I turned around fully expecting it to be my roommate, but it wasn't. It was this shadow in the shape of a person, like a person just made of darkness. They were about a foot shorter than me, and they looked pretty large in weight. I just stood there looking at them kind of dumbfounded. I remember saying, "Oh my God." I guess they were looking at me because they paused for a moment when they walked around me. I turned as they walked around me and watched them head towards the stove. Once they got to the stove, they vanished into thin air. So I just can't believe this. After all these years, I finally know the truth that ghosts are real and maybe afterlife is even real. You think I'd be scared, but I'm actually really excited. I kind of want to see more of them. I hope they show up again soon. I guess I've always been a bit of a weirdo. Never really been afraid of the dark or typical things that other people are afraid of. I wonder if I'm supposed to be like a medium or something. Does anybody have any tips on how to pursue this and strengthen my abilities? What happened to me when I was younger? I started to look back on a few paranormal experiences that I've had. This is the first I've ever had. When I was very little, me and my family got home late from a party. My parents didn't want to go through the trouble of putting 2 children into 2 separate bedrooms. They were tired. So they put me and my sleeping brother in the same bed. I woke up late into the night around 2. There was a noise coming from my nearby dresser, the drawers opening and closing. I freaked out and quietly nudged my brother, and he whispered his name into his ear. Or I whispered his name into his ear. The sound kept happening, and my brother, the heavy sleeper that he was, wouldn't wake up. I pulled the blanket over my head and curled into a fetal position until I fell asleep. It couldn't have been my mother or father. They were asleep at the time and exhausted from the party. And the weird thing is, my extremely Christian father had blessed the house when they had bought it a few years before this. I have no other explanation to this event other than that it was a spirit, and a ridiculous one at that. What was this? Something I can't explain occurred sometime in the night. This happened at some point last night. It was our 2-year wedding anniversary, so we went out to a Halloween party down the street and did some celebrating. We got home pretty tipsy around midnight. It didn't stay up for too long before going to sleep. When I woke up this morning, the first thing I noticed when walking into the bathroom is our wedding photo that we had in our living room was on the carpet instead of the shelf, near the doorway to the bedroom. I was confused by this, but thought maybe my wife did this for some reason, but I had no idea why. Once I got back to the bedroom, I asked my wife why she put the picture on the floor. Well, I was shocked when she said that she didn't put it there. She was wondering why I put the picture there. I obviously know that I didn't either. Nobody else lives with us. We just have a dog. Pretty sure the dog didn't move the picture. I've tried coming up with a logical explanation, but there isn't one. We've slept in the same room for 15 years. We definitely aren't sleepwalkers. Even with a slim chance one of us did, why the heck would we randomly move the wedding picture to the floor? Besides that, after recreating the occurrence, I realized how hard it is to balance the frame and make it stand on the plush carpet. There's absolutely no way the picture could have fallen off the shelf, let alone standing up perfectly. I'm completely baffled by this experience, and I'm at a loss how it even happened. Sadly, we do have a camera, but we only use it when we leave, so there's no video. We've been in our house for a couple of years and have never had anything like this happen. What makes it more creepy is that it was our wedding picture and our anniversary. I will say also that we had a couple of captures on our camera when we were out last night, and it caught some orbs, which I've never seen any of in videos previously in the last couple of years. The whole occurrence is so strange. The picture sits on the second shelf of the lamp shelf unit, about a foot or so off the ground, and it was about 3 feet away from where it was always been placed. Prophetic dreams. So, this is something I've rarely talked about except when very drunk. I think once I sent it into a paranormal YouTube channel and I was totally out of it, but in general, it's traumatized me. So I'm pretty silent about it. I still have nightmares of it to this day. Wonder if it was our channel. Anyway. When I was very young, maybe 10 years old or so, I had a horrifying nightmare. A girl, a little younger than me, was sitting in a closet, begging me to help her. She said people were looking in the wrong place for her. I didn't know what to do. The dream felt so real. Suddenly I could see through her eyes, as she was essayed by the man who lived there. Then I saw her being buried. I felt it. I was under the dirt just as she was. And I and she couldn't breathe. I woke up screaming for my dad and ran to my parents' room. My mom also woke up in a panic at the same time. She had the same dream. Mind you, these days we have almost zero relationship, and back then we weren't much better. She was abusive, so I highly doubt she would ever lie to corroborate my dream, especially in the way that she did. She knew in our state there was a missing girl, which I didn't know, and my mom was so scared by our shared dream that she called the police and explained the dreams to them. Of course, they thought she was some fake psychic trying to take advantage of the situation, which isn't uncommon, really. So they ignored her. It wasn't long after that little girl was found buried alive near her home and hadn't survived. She was held in the psycho's closet and abused before she was buried alive. I want to also mention that I didn't see an actual picture of this girl until about 8 years ago when I finally decided to see if the case was real. This sent me into a panic because it was the exact girl that I saw. This has haunted me for so long. I'm now an adult, still have nightmares from it. I just found some paranormal subreddits today, so I thought maybe I'd finally share sober. If you know this case, that's fine, but I personally don't want to say who it's about. Truly, I think of this girl daily. I personally won't say what case it is, because I'm sure some true crime enthusiasts may know who I mean, but I have no interest in getting any clout off their passing. Not just because of how awful the situation was, but also because it's truly fucked me up for life, so I can't even imagine what the family must feel. If you share with commenters who you think it's about, I understand, but I'd like to actually leave the victim out of this, I hope people understand that. I just have really never talked about this, and I wanted to get it off my chest. Has anyone else ever experienced these residual, seemingly prophetic nightmares? The fact that the dreams have resurfaced recently scares me. That my other nightmares may come true as well, too. Are there any tells that show you if it's a normal dream compared to something else? I will say that so far, I almost never dream in first-person point of view, except this horrible dream and a couple others. Ask Reddit. We, my partner and 2 daughters, ages 3 and not quite 1, moved into a new house about a year and a half ago. This house was occupied by the same couple for 49 years and happened to be right next door to our good friend who helped us find our house. The couple moved because they needed something that would be better to accommodate their aging and health challenges. Our oldest daughter, who had just turned 3 at the time, started having imaginary friends right before we moved. But their names were Beans, Beto, and Layla. Most of the dolls that she had similar names too. About a week after we moved in, she asked me why a man was standing in the kitchen. There was no one there, and my husband wasn't home yet. I asked what he looked like, and she said a big man with no hair. A few days later, we were walking by my bedroom. She said that the man was laying in the bed. I asked where he was laying, and she pointed to my husband's side of the bed. There was no one there. Soon after she started talking about Jordan, we didn't know any Jordans. When I asked what he looked like, she said tall with no hair and old like Dad. He was often around while we were eating. One morning, she was eating breakfast on her covered porch and was disturbed because she saw a young boy walking. He was walking on his hands and feet towards her neighbors. Not her friend, but the other neighbor. That was the first time that she was disturbed by seeing anyone. She would talk about Jordan here and there, but was never disturbed by him. Eventually, she stopped talking about him. Then one day in the mail, we got a MetLife insurance letter addressed to Jordan Jones at our address. Mind you, the owners of this house before us were there 49 years and had no connection to Jordan or the last name Jones. So after that, we put a gate and a fence between me and our friend's neighbors' yards. After that, strange things started happening in her house. TV would turn on by itself at night while the remotes were on the top of the TV stand. A floodlight she disconnected would turn on randomly in her garage, and her dogs would growl and bark often. During this time, my daughter started talking about Luna. She's died now, but wants to be alive. She burnt her face in the fire and somehow stole the flowers from her hair, and she wants them back, end quote. When asked, my daughter said that Luna and Jordan knew each other and liked us. They also liked my neighbor's dogs. She would often see people walking between our houses. We're a residential neighborhood, not a lot of foot traffic. She saw someone standing behind my husband in the basement. They were waving and said, "That's not Katie," and hears laughing and footsteps in the night. It's not as common anymore than it used to be. She remembers Jordan and Luna but doesn't talk about them often. My youngest, now 2, waves at nothing often. She asks, "Who's the girl?" Or, "Why is that girl crying?" while pointing to nothing. She doesn't seem scared, though. I used to feel heavy or feelings of dread in my house, or that something was walking parallel with me in our open hallway. But that subsided in the last year. strange experience. Last year was a difficult time for me as I experienced the loss of a friend suddenly, and my mother was involved in an accident where a person was killed, though she wasn't at fault. I began to have repressed traumatic memories beginning to surface of when I was a child in a domestic violence and substance abuse, and began questioning my self-worth and my ability to be a good enough father for my own children. I started experiencing rolling panic attacks and developing crippling anxiety, specifically OCD and agoraphobia. I had an indescribably intense fear of death, mostly centered around hell, even though I was no longer a practicing Catholic. Things were spiraling, and I was growing worse by the day. One night, as suddenly as anything can be, I went from asleep to awake. However, it was my body that was awake, but rather my consciousness. I was simply aware. I wasn't tired or sleepy. I couldn't see or feel. I felt no anxiety, fear, or happiness, only consciousness. It was as if I simply existed within the ether, weightlessness, disembodied. What I did feel in that awareness was a feeling of being completely content. There was nothing but peace. It was a moment of reprieve and solace when I was fighting my hardest. Fear of anything seemed to be the most absurd thing that I could imagine. I eventually came back into my body, so to speak. It was a completely fluid and seamless transition. I was actually kind of terrified briefly, but when I woke up the next day, it felt like I had experienced something special. What I believe is I somehow experienced my true spirit or being, the thing that I am that lives behind my eyes and in my heart, but is routinely silenced by my ego. For whatever reason, my fear of death was diminished greatly as my being feels as natural as anything else. I'm meant to be here. I don't know my role. I don't know my purpose. I don't know God. I do, however, know that not knowing is okay, because at my center, I am of the universe, and I do belong. I've never had the sensation again. The closest thing I've found to it was Ram Dass and others who talk about universal consciousness and interconnectedness. I'm converting into being able to see and communicate with spirits. For context, I'm an 18-year-old female, and my dad, 65-year-old male, has always been open to me about his experiences with paranormal entities and how he can see and contact them. Recently, over the past year or so, I've been realizing that I'm seeing more than what is normally welcome to the naked eye. I regularly go to the woods in my hometown, which is known to be an active home to spirits and a place where cult rituals take place. Yeah, it sounds fucked, but it's the best dog walk. It's a beautiful area, and I regularly go and sit in the graveyard to do a journal. As you can see, a pretty beautiful view of my city from this place. There have been several encounters with friends of mine where we've seen potential paranormal activity, such as a figure in smoke in the shape of a tall man float past us and disappear into thin air. A woman walking barefoot through the muddy, rainy woods up to us in the night wearing only a white nightgown from what looks like Victorian times. I turned my car engine on, and as I left it, we saw her making a slow beeline for my car. But over the past 7 to 8 months or so, I see and hear things that when I go to look so I can actually focus on whatever it is, there's never anything solid there. I'll be on my own in the graveyard journaling, and I'll see 2 shadow figures in the corner of my eye. And when I look directly, the figures always vanish, but never completely. There'll be leaves in the wind or even a faint shadow that quickly loses all of its opacity, just so that my brain knows I'm not imagining it. My dad's been able to see and contact spirits his entire life, and I finally think I'm ready to accept that I'm gifted in this rare way too. I wanted to know if there's anything I can do for myself to be able to use my gift for the greater good, and to be able to educate myself on it more. A child ghost wanted to be a part of our family. Throughout my whole childhood, my family and I would move from apartment to apartment. Let's call it apartment 2. Everything was going great at our new place. The apartment was old, but it had everything we needed: a pool, laundromat, and it was by our school. At this time, I was living with my mom, my sister, and my nephews in a 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom apartment. My mom gifted me a camera, and all of us started just taking pictures for fun. I wanted to be a YouTuber at that time. We looked back at the pictures that we were taking, and we noticed an extra person. It was small, wearing white, and it was creeping behind a corner. We all argued that it was the youngest of our family, but he kept saying that he was standing elsewhere. My nephew insisted that it wasn't him. We all didn't want to believe what had happened, so we all just sort of shrugged it off. A different day, my mom and I were in our room. We were poor and we shared a room. We saw a fast shadow running in the hallway from the living room to the second bedroom. It was short in height, and it's hard to explain, but we got a sense that it wanted us to follow it, almost like hide and seek. My mom and I followed what we thought was my little nephew playing around. We ran into the room and we looked absolutely everywhere, and we couldn't find my nephew. My mom and I looked at each other, and we knew what we had just seen, but we never spoke about it after that day. I myself couldn't believe it, so I went looking around. In my room, behind the door, I found 2 marks of 2 children's height written in pencil. The names were foreign, and not any I'd ever heard of before. One of the markings on the wall was very similar to that of the shadows. My second to oldest nephew, let's call him Jim, he would have reoccurring nightmares at weird times of the night. Jim would randomly wake up at 2 or 3 a.m. sobbing and pointing at the corner. Jim was speechless and would only pause from crying to say, "There's shadow people looking at me." None of us but Jim were old enough to see anything there. And this continued to happen a handful of times around the same time. 11 years later, my sister picked me up from the airport after we had gone to Mexico. On the way back home, I was telling her about folklore stories I'd been told by a priest in Mexico. Without me saying anything, she said, "You know, I never told you, but I saw a ghost at our last apartment. It was short and see-through. It had been watching me shower." She went on to mention that it had watched her shower 2 times, and every time she would look at it, it would get startled, run into the closet door, and vanish into thin air. She agreed with me that this entity had a harmless, playful, childlike feeling to it. She continued to tell me that after I had moved out to college, more things kept happening. My youngest nephew was in his room lying on the top bunk bed while playing his Switch. He felt a strong kick from the bottom bed and yelled angrily, "Jim, stop it!" It happened once more, then he got irritated and looked below his bed to find no one there. He started screaming and crying until his mom came into the room to comfort him. My family moved out a few years later, but not primarily because of the ghosts. To this day, I wonder if a child had passed in that apartment, and if what we saw was indeed the same ghost. All we know is that, by the way it acted, this child ghost wanted to be included in our family. A Tale of Two Girls. In 1942, a girl named Ashalata, who was in her teens. She used to reside in a small town in Dhulia, Maharashtra. She was the daughter of a farmer, and they were not economically well equipped, so her father used to work in other people's farms to keep their house, a small hut, sustained. Her daily wage as a farmer was about 10 rupees for one day of strenuous work. Despite their poverty, they led a relatively calm and peaceful life, where her mother cooked grains and she also helped her mother in doing housework. Every morning, Asha insisted to accompany her father to the farm, but he consistently refused, saying that it wasn't a good idea to leave their mother home alone to fend for herself, and the place of the farm where he used to work was also quite far. He used to walk many miles to reach there. Understanding his situation, she politely obliged. Fortunately, after a few months, her father got bitten by a snake while working on that farm, and this led to his untimely death. This incident crushed Asha, and her mother too, and because there was no earning member left in the family besides herself, she decided to take up the responsibility of working on the same farm. After speaking to the landowner, who was kind enough to grant her work, Asha decided to start the next day immediately. As the distance was very long, Asha had to wake up early, finish her homework, and reach the farm by 8 a.m. every day, work till evening, and leave for home as the sun set in the sky. Even though the first days were difficult, she persisted and also started enjoying going to work as it distracted her from, having to deal with the grief of losing her father. She slowly became friends with another girl working on the farm. Her name was Rukmini. Both Rukmini and Asha had shared equal burdens of their home, as Rukmini was also the sole earning member of her small family, and she had a small brother who was specially abled, and a father who was an alcoholic. They shared anecdotes of their childhood with each other, and Rukmini happily shared her Bakari. They did this beneath a tree every day for lunch. The farm where they used to work together was huge. Plants like cotton, grains like jowar and bajra, which suited the season, were cultivated there, and in the furthest most corner of that farm there was a shade built for rearing domestic animals. A small well, a kua, stood firmly beside the shade, and since the well was mostly dried up due to the drought that had happened in the past, the soil was barren and wild grass grew around the well. For this reason, nobody ever visited that corner of the farm. Until one fateful day. Both Asha and Rukmini came to the farm as usual and found that some of the plants had been infested with worms. That afternoon, when the owner of the farm showed up, he was shocked to see his precious plants in this deadly state, gave both the girls an earful and instructed them to uproot every infested plant, lest they corrupt the entire farm. Both Rukmini and Asha hugged their faces down in shame as he shouted at them vehemently. He warned them that they should only be allowed to go home once they've done their work here, and must not leave a minute early. It doesn't matter how late it gets. He left after some time, and both Asha and Rukmini started their work. Even though it was getting on her nerves, Asha knew that she had to get home early as her mother's alone and couldn't bear to waste even a single minute in stretching the arduous task that lay in her hands. When the sun began to set, Rukmini rubbed her hands and she said, "Asha, listen, we should leave by now. We won't reach the highway on time. It'll get late. And it's Amvas. We can't stay here in the night." Asha couldn't speak because not even half of the work was done, even though they started early in the noon. She insisted that they stay another hour and then leave. Fortunately for the nature who doesn't bulge for anyone, within 20 minutes, angry rain began pouring abruptly as if someone had cut through the clouds. Both Rukmini and Asha were drenched within minutes. Rukmini held out her hand to Asha for her to hold on, and together they just ran and sat beneath the shade near the well, till the rain subsided. Even though the rain stopped after some time, the moonless night covered the entire farm in pitch-black darkness. Even their faces weren't visible to each other. They both eventually decided to spend the night in the shade and leave early the next morning. To distract themselves from the unsettling aura around them, Asha began reminiscing about her past and began telling Rukmini about her childhood's small gimmicks from her father. Her childhood memories were always a happy escape for her, and a good distraction to get through anything. They both had laid down on the floor beneath the shade, and Rukmini was taking much interest in listening to Asha's stories. After an hour or so, Asha lost track of time. She turned her head to look at Rukmini. All the blood drained from Asha's face when she saw Rukmini, who had closed her eyes and was snoring silently. Yet it was Rukmini's voice coming from down under the well saying, Aka? Then what happened? Why'd you stop talking? Asha became whimsical and began shaking Rukmini, forcing her to get up. Meanwhile, the voices echoed through the farm, getting louder and louder with each passing minute, as if someone was crawling upwards from the well. When Rukmini woke up, she heard the same voices coming from the well, and when realization dawned on their faces, both the girls ran across the farm, leaving their belongings behind. And only one thing managed to escape from Rukmini's lips the whole time, like a mantra that she kept repeating to herself. Don't look behind, don't look behind, don't look behind. They couldn't manage to see anything. Yet they ran some more until they reached the furthest corner of the highway where the streetlights helped them lead the way ahead. Curiosity caught on Asha, and she sneaked a peek and looked behind. What she saw was a naked woman standing afar near the farm, just escaped, completely wet, glowing in the darkness of the night, her hair dripping with water, her eyes all white, no life. It looked like it was a dead body standing tall, her lips curved with a smile. She kept smiling till she walked back, still facing them, and disappeared behind the crops again. They never went back to the farm. Whether it was a ghost, a Judail, a dead woman who was haunting that place for a long time, it's a mystery. But this story haunted my Nani, my grandma Asha, till her death on August 11th, 2013. What happened to Rukmini after that incident was something my Nani never told me. I think the school I work in is haunted. So my first experience started with something completely small and insignificant, but made me think more. I'm a phys ed teacher in the school, and I was in the school for a holiday club. This means that there was nobody in the school other than me and my team, and the children were working. The children are not allowed upstairs or anywhere without us. What happened was I was outside coaching, and I looked up to the third floor. There were papers in the room fluttering in front of the windows. Now, this could obviously be explained by a drought or an open window, of course, but the strange thing is that at this point we had no access to the school's top floors, and they're locked and alarmed. The alarm will go off if any windows or doors are opened. The main thing that happened to make me think happened 2 days ago. I was walking upstairs to my office on the second floor. We now have access to all the floors, and I heard a person whistling, like full-on whistling. This whistling stopped as soon as I came off the stairs, and just a reminder that there's no one in the school apart from my team, and definitely nobody on the second floor. The next thing is that I left my office and walked to the second floor staff room, which is directly across from my office. And on that walk, I heard a child laugh and giggle. There's absolutely no way any children were on the second floor, and no way that I heard it from downstairs. There's been other strange occurrences, but this is the first time I've actually been unable to debunk it. Disappearing sculpture. A couple of months ago, I was shadowing someone for a new job. We went to an elementary school to do some work for them. As we walked through a hallway, I looked out the window into a courtyard, and my eyes were immediately drawn to a gargoyle on the corner of the roof. My eyes were drawn to it because it didn't fit. The architecture of the school was basic, red bricks, probably built in the 70s. Nothing of that style anywhere, and the gargoyle looked far more weathered than anything else. I could barely pick out a face, even though the rest of the school was in very good repair. Kind of looked like a sphinx, but again, it was very weathered. I went back to that school today, and it wasn't there anymore. What's more, the staff I asked didn't know that there was ever a gargoyle in that courtyard. Easy answer. Admin thought it was an eyesore that had to be taken down, while many people just never looked up. I can accept that. But the fact that it didn't fit in at all and seemed like I'm the only one who's noticed it seems pretty strange to me.